the dumb man-eater of Talavadi. Have met many unforgettable characters in my time, and most of them have been jungle men, Indian, Anglo-Indian and European. For the forest appears to develop a man's personality. The more time he spends there, the clearer his personality becomes. One such character was my friend Huey Hailstone, who lived in a wonderful home he had built for himself called Moya Valley Ranch, down at a place named Mudianore, near Talamali, in a corner of the North Coimbatore district and not very far away from the Moya River, which separates North Coimbatore from the Nilgiri Forest Division. Now Huey was a character if ever there was one. He attended the same school as I did, but passed out much earlier. From that time he followed a varied career. But the man had brains. Everything he touched turned to gold. With some of this money he bought a large tract of forest land, and on it he built his Moya Valley Ranch. Huey had a fine collection of firearms, the best that money could buy, but among these he had a great fancy for a .023 Mauser rifle with a hexagonal barrel, with which, if I remember rightly, he told me he had shot 9 elephants and over 20 tigers. Later, Huey took a great liking to my son Donald and presented him with this very weapon. Donald was, of course, delighted. But what enhanced the value of the gift was the fact that it was Huey's favorite weapon. Frankly, I do not believe I could ever part with my ancient, but lovable, old .405. It has been my companion and solace for over 40 years. My story begins at a point where in some part of India Huey either found or heard of a special kind of grass, the stems of which when dry were stronger than the ordinary matchstick, and not so brittle. They would not break easily, and they burned readily. So Huey conceived the idea of cultivating this grass on a large scale on the lands of his Moya Valley Ranch, with a view to starting a match factory that would turn out a product to be sold at about half the price of those already on the market, and of much higher quality. He obtained seeds in quantity, plowed his lands with the first shower of the monsoon rains, and sowed them. Up came the grass in fine style. Acres of it. The land was virgin and the grass grew to 5 feet and more. I remember watching it as it bent and rippled to the breeze. But before Huey's grass could be turned into matchsticks there came herds of deer, particularly cheetal, and large sounders of wild pigs. The deer, of course, ate the grass, while the wild pigs made it their home and did considerable damage by digging it up at places, though for the most part they burrowed a maze of low tunnels through it, leading here, there and everywhere. In these tunnels they sheltered and multiplied to the extent that Huey wondered eventually whether he should persevere with the match factory or run a ham and bacon concern. Best of all, with deer and the pigs came tigers and panthers to eat them. Rather, I should say more tigers than panthers, for the former arrived in such numbers as not only to decimate the deer and pig population, but to kill and eat the panthers too, so that in the course of time the smaller cats learned to give the match grass a very wide berth. Now Huey employed an assistant, a man named Sweza, a corruption of D'Souza, who came from Mangalore on the west coast of India. Sweza was a most versatile individual. He did everything for Huey, whose problems he not only knew but anticipated. He once said to me with reference to his employer, "I don't know why Master spend much money to make more money. Master got plenty money to enjoy. But no, he want to make matchsticks, tooth powder from babul bark, fertilizer from jungle seeds mixed with elephant's dung, invention for finding underground water, digging ground for getting some stones. Master says got iron, all sort of things. Only spending money. Why for? This very good place. Master should enjoy. Plenty girls got it here. Young girls. Not enough husbands here. I tell it Master. He get very angry. He say it, Sweza, you bloody rogue, you got it 1 wife and 3 more women already. I saved you from 1 more wife. Now you want to put me in the same trouble. But he was a good fellow, this Sweza, game for anything and as keen as mustard. And he ate well. His paunch and his jolly smile showed this. One Easter, Sweza felt that his master and himself were entitled to roast pork or venison. So he borrowed his master's small bore rifle after confiding his good intentions to Huey, and waded into the match grass, now somewhat withered and thinned down by the summer heat, in search of quarry. Sweza had not gone very far when he saw the snout of a medium-sized wild pig regarding him with grave suspicion from between the stems of the grass. He fired. The pig fell, picked itself up again, and disappeared. Sweza started to follow hard on its trail. Just then there was a great swishing in the grass where the pig had disappeared, a snarl, and the scream of a dying animal. Sweza beat a hasty retreat and told his master. Huey came out with one of his heavy rifles and Sweza led him to the place where he had fired at the pig, pointing out the direction in which it had gone. Huey went on and Sweza made to follow him from behind, but Huey very wisely objected to this. He did not want a bullet from Sweza's rifle in his back. So he asked his servant to go back and wait for him in the open. Huey came to the spot where the pig had been killed, but there was no trace of its body. The killer had carried it away. Bent and broken stems of dried grass showed the direction he had taken with his burden. Moving cautiously forward, he had gone for quite 100 yards when suddenly a loud growl from in front told him the killer was feeding somewhere ahead and resented his intrusion. But Hailstone had seen and shot many tigers and was not to be intimidated by a growl. He moved forward stealthily and the tiger growled more loudly. Huey knew the charge would come at any moment. A little later the tiger charged. It came in great leaping bounds through the dried match grass. Hailstone waited till he could see the contorted face clearly, till the final spring would land the beast right on top of him. Then he fired. Thus was born the man-eater of Talavadi. Huey's bullet struck the tiger full in the face. The impact tended to stop it, but the weight of the body behind still pushed it forward, with the result that the tiger somersaulted just a few yards away. Huey worked the bolt of his rifle rapidly to get in a second shot. The magazine jammed. He did the right thing after that. He turned and fled. Evidently the tiger was temporarily blinded or maybe too hurt to follow. It floundered about in the grass, digging great holes in the earth as, in agony, it bit and tore the ground with its claws and teeth. Huey dashed into the bungalow to get another rifle, Sweza running after him and asking what had happened. But by the time Hailstone got to the spot again, advancing one step at a time, the tiger had vanished, while splashes of blood and saliva on the ground made it plain he had received a severe wound in the region of the mouth or throat. It is a common belief among some hunters that a wounded feline should not be followed up immediately. Sufficient time should be allowed to pass in which the animal might possibly bleed to death. At least, the wounds would stiffen to the extent that the beast would be disinclined to move far, or it might even be incapable of movement. But there is another school of thought which advocates following up at once. The theory in this case is that the wounded animal should not be given time to recover from the shock and pain of its wounds and from its immediate fear. The advocates of this theory feel that, with the passage of time and long hours of pain, the wounded beast becomes vicious and bent upon revenge, whereas immediately after being wounded it seeks only to escape. They also argue that on humanitarian grounds it is very cruel to allow an animal to suffer hours of intense agony with a vital organ shot away. Now I am not going to give my own judgment on these theories, except to say that both are partly right and partly wrong. Each animal has its individual characteristics and special nature and will react in its own way. Huey was a firm believer in the second theory and lost no time in following up. The blood trail through the long match grass was clear. It left Huey's land and entered the forest, where things became a little more difficult. Huey had to rely on his own abilities as Sweza, still trailing behind with the other rifle, was no tracker. They followed it across a dry ravine, where the tiger had lain down and then continued, and across flat country the other side. The fact that the tiger had lain down indicated that it was badly wounded, and as Huey had followed up at once, the animal could not be very far away. Probably it had heard him and Sweza and was taking cover in the undergrowth. The third item of information was that this animal appeared to be a coward. It should have taken advantage of the terrain and plenty of cover in the ravine to ambush the two men. By now the bleeding had lessened, and after crossing the flat stretch for another furlong the trail began to lead downhill, where the ground became increasingly stony. Huey had to slow down and keep looking about for the next drop or two of blood. Soon even this ceased and he could go no further. On that hard ground no pug marks were visible. For some unaccountable reason the tracts of forest in the Madianore area are entirely devoid of jungle tribes or aboriginal population. It is believed this has been so since the days when Tipu Sultan, the Muslim ruler of Mysore, invaded the surrounding country, sweeping all before him. So Huey had no opportunity to return later and follow the tiger, as there was nobody in all that area who knew anything about tracking. The village of Talavadi is about 2 miles south of Madianore, where Huey had his farm. It is a small hamlet surrounded by fertile country. Nearly 2 months later, one of the villagers from this place bought a tract of land from his neighbor, or rather arranged to buy it, for the sale deed pertaining to this transaction had necessarily to be signed and registered in the office of the sub-registrar, and the money paid by the purchaser to the seller in the presence of this august individual, whose headquarters were at a larger village named Talavadi, situated 7 miles north of Madianore. So the vendor and the prospective purchaser, the latter carrying the money he was going to pay for the land, which came to 400 rupees, including the incidental expenses involved in the sale deed, set forth together on foot to cover the 9 miles between Talavadi and Talavadi. They had covered 2/3 of this distance when they crossed a stream that had a little water in it. Here they stopped under a large tree to eat the curried balls of ragi flour they had brought with them as a midday meal. The purchaser then went down to the stream to drink and wash while his companion watched him with sleepy eyes. Suddenly something huge leaped down upon the drinking man from the opposite bank of the stream and back again across the stream to disappear as abruptly as it had come, except that there was no longer any sign of the unfortunate purchaser. He had disappeared, along with that horrible apparition. The vendor, now fully awake, leaped to his feet and ran as fast as he could towards Talavadi, covering the 3 miles to that place in record time. There he gasped out his story before the sub-registrar and the clerks sitting in the office. All this being something out of the ordinary, the sub-registrar sent the man to the police station, where the whole tale was repeated. In the opinion of the constable in charge, there was nothing strange about the story. As he reasoned it out, here we have a reporting that he is selling some land to B for 400 rupees. A and B set out to register the sale, B carrying 400 rupees. On the way, A says that some strange creature appeared out of the jungle and disappeared again, taking B with it. A reports he was more than half asleep and cannot describe what this strange something was. But the facts remain that B has vanished, the 400 rupees have vanished with him, and the land still belongs to A. Without further ado, the head constable arrested the unfortunate vendor and locked him in the police station's solitary cell. Then he wrote a lengthy report, stating why he suspected he had caught a murderer. He did not forget to add that the sub-inspector at Satyamangalam, which was the headquarters of the police and forest departments and the place to which the prisoner would have to be sent, might please bear in mind when he read the report that it was the humble prayer of the head constable that promotion was long overdue and this brave and dramatic arrest of a dangerous murderer and thief should forthwith clinch matters and lead to the said promotion without delay. He closed the report by saying that he offered daily prayers for the sub-inspector's continued long life and prosperity. It was not till a week later that the fourth constable attached to the police station at Talavadi returned from leave. The head constable then felt he could manage with 2 policemen while he sent the other 2 on escort duty with the prisoner, and his report, to Satyamangalam, where the sub-inspector resided, 40 miles away. They should reach there in 3 days, for they had to walk the whole distance. Hailstone happened to be standing at the entrance to the grounds of his farm, which abutted on the track leading from Talavadi to Satyamangalam, when he saw the 2 policemen coming along with a prisoner handcuffed between them. Conversationally he inquired what wrong the man had done and where he was being taken. The constables, glad of the respite, said they were escorting a murderer, while the poor vendor burst into tears, sobbing out his innocence and his story afresh. Huey pricked up his ears. "Stop weeping, you idiot," he said kindly but firmly. "If you want me to help you, just answer a simple question. What was this strange something that you say carried away your companion? At least, what did it look like?" "Durai," the man replied, striving to control himself, "I saw my friend stoop to drink water. At that instant I must have fallen asleep. I heard nothing, but seemed to see some huge, long body jump down from the jungle across the stream and jump back again. Then only did I notice the man had gone. I woke up and ran all the way to Talavadi. Now these policemen say I have murdered my friend and taken his money. Then he started crying once more at the thought of his plight. Huey remembered the tiger he had wounded just 2 months earlier. He had often thought about it and wondered if the animal had died or had recovered from its wound. And if it had recovered, Huey knew that sooner or later he would hear about the animal again. Could this be it? Did it look like a tiger? He asked abruptly. The policemen looked at him stupidly, but the man in handcuffs replied quickly, "Come to think of it, Durai, it might have been a tiger." As I said, I was more than half asleep and the whole thing happened so quickly. But it was nothing in human form that carried away my companion, of that I am certain. It was something long and big. "Don't take this poor man to Satyamangalam," Huey advised the policemen. "Save yourself the journey, for he is no murderer. I think I know what really happened. But the officers of law and order the world over are dogged in their purposes, especially when they have someone in handcuffs." The policemen continued on their way to Satyamangalam with the captive, while Huey went in his car to Talavadi. To his mortification, he discovered from the head constable that nobody knew exactly where the incident had taken place except the prisoner himself, as nobody had taken the trouble to investigate the story or make an inspection of the spot. Hailstone considered telling the head constable about the wounded tiger but decided against it. A man of his temperament, with a one-track mind, might do anything. He might even lock Hailstone up. So he left the police station without further ado and set out for Satyamangalam, overtaking the 2 policemen and their prisoner some 10 miles beyond Mudyanur. Glad of the lift, the 3 men piled into the car and in less than 90 minutes the whole party were with the sub-inspector. The sub-inspector read the head constable's report and then listened to what Huey had to say. "And this man wants a promotion," was his comment after Huey had told him that the head constable had not even troubled to visit the scene of the tragedy. "I shall see him reverted. Please take me to Talavadi in your car." Back they went, all 5 of them, to give the head constable at Talavadi the nastiest surprise of his life. Then the vendor took them to the place where the would-be purchaser and his money had vanished. The head constable was made to go too. Over a week had passed, but when they crawled to the top of the bank they found the pug marks of a tiger at the spot where it had clambered back with its burden, the unlucky would-be purchaser. Casting around, a little distance away but still to be seen in the sand, were the fainter imprints of the tiger before it had launched its attack. Huey had not brought his rifle. The sub-inspector inquired nervously if the tiger might still be there. Hailstone said no, and the 6 men started searching the immediate surrounding for the remains of the victim. Strangely enough, it was the vendor, now no longer in chains, who stumbled upon the gnawed bones. A few rags and the 10-rupee notes that had been scattered by the breeze in a wide circle in the grass and undergrowth, confirmed that the remains were indeed all that was left of the purchaser. There were only a few, as most of the bones had been removed by the vultures, jackals and hyenas that had visited the carcass after the tiger had finished. The man-eater struck a second time scarcely a month later. This was at the village of Nagalur, about halfway between Huey's place and the Moya River which bounded the Nilgiri district. The third victim was an old man who was walking behind his 2 sons on the old Sultan's Battery Road, a couple of miles behind Talimali village. This killing took place in broad daylight, at noon, as a matter of fact. The 3 men had set out together from Talimali to Nagalur, where the second victim had been taken. For some distance their way lay along the old road I have named, a relic of the days of that fierce Muslim conqueror who long ago brought terror to this region. They had not gone far when they came to a mighty wild mango tree. Monkeys had knocked down some of the ripe fruit and the 3 men stopped to eat. When they started walking again the father had fallen behind, from where he continued to talk to them about the business that was taking them to Nagalur. He had reminded them that it was getting late and they had all begun to walk faster, when a sudden choking cry made the two sons turn around to see a huge tiger with its jaws firmly in their father's throat, in the act of springing into the undergrowth that closely bordered the road on both sides. Where the beast had come from they never knew. It had certainly made no sound whatever, not even a growl or snarl, which was rather unusual, for attacking tigers generally roar or make some sort of noise to inflate their own courage before springing. In this case, all they had heard was their father's last gasp. By this time the attacker had disappeared and the two boys took to their heels, running as fast as they could back to Alamy. Consternation spread among the village folk, and the man-eater, as if he knew very well that his name had struck terror in the area, increased the number of his attacks as he began to roam over a wider circle. He killed as far north as the high road connecting Satyamangalam with the large town of Chamrajnagar in Mysore state. He killed to the east as far as Dimbam, a hamlet standing on the escarpment of mountains overlooking the Satyamangalam plain. He crossed the Moya river and went into the Nilgiri district to the south, and on the west he trespassed into the Bandipur area which lies in Mysore state. Unfortunately, at just about this time Huey, who had always been a vigorous man, fell ill. It happened suddenly and unexpectedly. I know he felt deeply about all that had taken place and was happening, for he held himself responsible for starting the tiger on its man-eating career by wounding it, and he chafed at the illness that prevented him from going after it, which he would otherwise have assuredly done. So he wrote to me, and that was what took me in my Studebaker to Moya Valley Ranch. Sweza met me at the gate and I found Huey asleep in a canvas chair on his veranda. He had not heard my car. The change in his appearance since we had last met was almost frightening. A robust man, he had shrunk to half his normal size and looked haggard and very ill. He apologized for dragging me away from home, and then, as I sat beside him drinking tea and eating the most delicious mangoes that grew on his land, Huey told the story as I have told it here, not sparing himself and full of self-recrimination not only for wounding the tiger but for not finishing it off after that. These things happen, Huey, was all the comfort I could offer. You must pull yourself together now and join me in killing it. He looked at me wryly and said, Kenneth, my hunting days are over. My next shikar will be in the happy hunting grounds, if there's such a place. Indeed, he never hunted again. Shortly after the end of this episode he went by air to England. He had already bought a house there, a nice place in the country. But he was not to enjoy it, for he had been there only a few days when he slipped and fell down the staircase, injuring himself severely. Soon afterwards he died of a heart attack. However, we now discussed what should be done. It was clear that it would not be worth my while to visit Nagalur and Talamy and other places where the tiger had killed, in order to question the people about the animal's habits and peculiarities. Huey had already done this before falling ill and told me all he had discovered. To begin with, there was scarcely any doubt that it was the animal he had wounded that had now become a man-eater. The few people who had seen it clearly, particularly the two sons of the old man who had been snatched on the Sultan's Battery Road, affirmed that the glimpse they had got of the tiger's face showed there was something seriously the matter with it. The face had been hideously scarred and contorted. Secondly, the animal's uncanny silence on every occasion when there had been a witness to its attack proved that it was either a very strange animal by nature, or that something was wrong with its vocal cords. Moreover, nobody remembered having ever heard this tiger roar. Of course, tigers had often roared in the area. This was to be expected, because it was full of tigers. But in no locality where any of the human kills had taken place, or at least not for a few days before or after that killing, had any tiger roared in the forest. For this reason the rumor spread that the man-eater was dumb. The procedure normally followed in trying to shoot a man-eater is as unexciting as it appears to be self-contradictory. The hunter purchases 3 or 4 live baits in the form of buffalo heifers or young bulls and ties them out at pre-selected places where macans have already been put up, in the hope that the tiger may kill one of them. The hunter then sits in the macan the following night to shoot the tiger when it returns for a second meal. Having heard that man-eaters eat men, you may wonder why an animal bait is tied out. Would a man-eater want to kill it? The answer is that man-eaters do not confine themselves to a diet of human flesh. They merely prefer the flesh of men to other meat. Perhaps a man is easier to find. He is certainly easier to stalk and kill. Maybe there is something appetizing about human flesh. But anyway, one cannot very well tie out a human being as bait. With Huey's influence and Swez's help, I purchased 4 young bulls at Talavadi village. The 2 boys whose father had been killed volunteered to help me in tethering the animals and building makans, so I recruited them and 2 more to assist. With Huey and Sweza we formed a committee of 7 persons when we sat down to deliberate on where to tie our baits. Strangely, it has become customary to tether a bait as near as possible to the spot where a kill has already taken place. I do not really know why this is so. It is certainly wrong reasoning to infer that a man-eater, like a murderer, may have a guilty conscience and come back to the scene of his crime. To a man-eater his action is no crime. It is merely his dinner. I admit I have fallen into the habit myself, but now I come to think of it, the practice follows faulty reasoning. As a matter of fact, a man-eater is more likely to avoid the scene of one of his former kills rather than go there again, because he knows of the publicity it occasioned and the number of people who have visited the spot since the occurrence. The real thing to do, as I have related in earlier stories, is to try to work out the line of beat the killer has been following by studying a map of the locality and marking on it the places where each human kill occurred and the date of each event. When the tiger is a man-eater of long standing, with many crimes to his discredit, such a study reveals that he has been following a fixed route over and over again, returning to the same localities, but not the exact spot in which he has killed before, once in so many weeks or months as the case may be. In Shikar parlance, this habit or practice is known as the man-eater's beat. I suppose in a way this answers the question posed earlier as to why it has become more or less an accepted practice to tie a bait near the spot where a human kill has already occurred. One hopes it will be on the tiger's beat and that he will come again. But this may not happen for many weeks or even months, for every man-eater does not follow a beat. Most do, but there are exceptions. And in any case such a beat can only be worked out with a man-eater of long standing. The animal I was after had started recently and his killings so far had been haphazard. All of which brings me back to the fact that it was difficult for us to decide precisely where to tie out and there was much difference of opinion. The 2 boys advocated trying the Sultan's Battery Road where their father had been killed. The other 2 men I had recruited to help me said the track leading from Talamali to Talavadi would be best, as tiger pug marks were seen along it nearly every day. Huey suggested tying the 4 baits a mile apart from each other and in a straight line, 2 to 3 miles south of Talamali, where the ground fell away abruptly to the valley of the Moya River. Sweza suggested tying up somewhere in Huey's match grass, where the tiger was first wounded, because he felt it would return there to eat the spotted deer and wild pig that were still abundant. Of all these suggestions, I decided the last was the least likely to bring success. The man-eater would never return to a place where it had been so badly hurt. So we ruled it out. All the other suggestions were equally good and it appeared to be a matter of luck where and when the tiger would next show up. Eventually we decided to tether one of the baits on the Sultan's Battery Road, another on the Talamali-Talavadi track, and the 3rd and 4th baits at 2 of the most likely spots along the ridge south of Talamali that overlooked the Moya River, as suggested by Huey. I felt that the kill, if and when it took place, would be one of these 2 baits, as tigers passed and from the Nilgiri forests to the Talamali Reserve across this ridge. However, as there was more than one tiger in the area, we would not know whether the man-eater or some quite innocent tiger had made the kill, and the only course open would be to shoot it in the hope that it turned out to be the man-eater. The selection of the exact spot for each tie-up was to be left to me. I told my 4 helpers to return at dawn the next day with another 8 men, so that there would be a dozen of them altogether, allowing sufficient men for the task of erecting each of the 4 makans that were to be put up before the baits were tied out. I have found it wise to erect the makan first and only afterwards to tie the bait in a suitable line of fire. Then, when a kill occurs, the hunter is ready to take his place. The other way around, much disturbance is caused in tying a makan after the bait has been killed, and should the tiger be lying in concealment within hearing, he generally fails to return. The makan I favored using at that time, and still think is best, is an ordinary charpoy cot with its 4 legs cut short. For those of you who don't know what a charpoy cot is, I may explain that it consists of a rectangular wooden or bamboo frame of 4 pieces, about 6 feet by 3. Rope, or white cotton tape, is laced across this frame, while 4 legs at each of the 4 corners complete the cot. Most villages sleep on the ground, but in certain places unduly infested with snakes and scorpions, charpoy cots are the only type that are favored, for they are made in the villages and cost in the region of 5 rupees each, including the rope used. Where cotton tape or webbing is employed for more comfort, the price, at the most, is doubled. My makan consisted of a cot of the latter type. Each of the 4 legs had been shortened to a foot in length, sufficient to provide something by which to tie the cot to the branches of a tree. The cot itself was cut into 2 and folded on 2 hinges for convenience of transport. Its advantages are obvious. It provided maximum comfort with minimum weight and noise should I be forced to move about, which, incidentally, is the one thing you should never do in sitting up. Huey favored another type of makan, which was nothing more than a folding canvas chair with a footrest to keep your legs from dangling downwards. Sitting in one of these always gave me a sense of insecurity, a feeling that I would either fall out of it, or that the whole structure would collapse at any moment. Of course, this was only prejudice, as in reality there was no real risk either way, and I was grateful when Huey offered to lend me his canvas chairmakan to be used in one of the 4 places we had selected. This meant that the remaining 2 makans would have to be constructed on the spot with bamboos and wood cut in the jungle. Work began in earnest next day, when the dozen men arrived carrying their sharp knives. Huey supplied all the rope we would need, so with 4 of the men leading the bulls I had purchased to serve as bait, we were soon on the Talavadi road, where we were to tie the first makan. We had gone scarcely a quarter of a mile along this track when we saw, clearly imprinted on the soft earth, the fresh pug marks of a tiger that had come down the bed of a small nullah that crossed the road. The tiger had passed in the early hours of the morning, which was revealed by the fact that the powdery dust bordering the edges of the track had not yet fallen into the depressions made by the tiger's pads. With the passage of a few hours and the action of the wind, this would certainly have happened with the tracks more than 6 hours old. Walking up the nullah, both to the left and right of where it crossed the road, we saw several older tracks, indicating that this dry striambad was much used either by the tiger whose tracks we had just seen or by other tigers in the locality. Unfortunately, due to their age, these tracks could not be identified for certain with the fresh ones along the road, which undoubtedly had been made by an adult male of rather bigger than average size. A banyan tree grew on the farther bank of the nullah just before it crossed the road, and all agreed that this would be the ideal place for the first makan. It was an old tree, and many of the roots that had dropped to the earth from the higher branches had in the course of the years, themselves taken root and grown into the thickness of minor tree trunks. Within this network of the roots and trunks it would be easy for us to put up an inconspicuous makan, and I decided to save my charpoy and Huey's chair for one of the other places where natural construction might not be so easy. We completed that makan in 90 minutes, and after tying the first bait in a convenient position, set out for our second selection, which you will remember was the Sultan's Battery Road. The sons of the old man who had been killed showed me where the tragedy had taken place, and within a couple of furlongs of this spot and once again where a nullah crossed the road, we erected the second makan. This again was constructed on the spot, but took much longer to do, so that it was nearly noon before we set out for the ridge, 2 miles away, overlooking the Moya Valley and Nilgiri jungles whence the tigers generally came. My guides, who had lived in the area all their lives, pointed out first one then a second game trail that led up from the valley to the south of us, down which in the distance flowed the Moya River, its course easily recognizable by the thick belt of giant trees on its bank. From the height at which we were standing, the Moya looked like a great green python, writhing its course through the forest. On convenient trees we tied our remaining makans, my charpoy first and finally Huey's canvas chair, while with the tying up of our 4th unfortunate bull bait, the work of the day came to an end. The sun was sinking across the jungles of Bandipur to the west when we started on our walk back to Huey's farm, quite 5 miles away. It had been a long day and we were very tired, but I was very satisfied by the 4 jobs we had completed. All I had now to do was scour the jungle in other directions by day in the hope of meeting the man-eater accidentally. Meanwhile, I would sleep peacefully at Huey's place by night till one of my baits was taken. Little did I know what was going to happen. The 2 sons of the old man and the first 2 men who had volunteered to help me had been instructed to visit the 4 baits next morning, and every morning thereafter, and to feed and water them, till a kill occurred. They were to begin with the most distant baits, the 2 animals we had tied on the western ridge, and then work eastwards to the Sultan's Battery Road, and finally to the first bait on the Talavadi track, which was the closest of the 4 to Huey's farm. It was 10:30 next morning when I heard them coming up the driveway, talking excitedly, and I knew that a kill had occurred. But the news they brought was surprising and disconcerting. The last bait we had tied the previous evening, the one under Huey's canvas chair macan, had been killed and part eaten, and the first animal at the junction of the nullah with the Talavadi Road had also been killed and about half devoured. 2 kills on the same night, at points at least 5 miles apart. This clearly pointed to 2 tigers. Now which of them was the man-eater and in which of the macans should I sit? Another consultation was held, but this time we were unanimous. The tiger that had killed the first bait, the nearest to the farm, was far more likely to be the man-eater, for its tracks had indicated that it haunted the nullah crossing the Talavadi Road, on which a human kill had already taken place and which was frequented by human beings. The other kill on the ridge was at a far less frequented spot, where people hardly ever went, but which was used by tigers coming from the Nilgiri district, or returning to it. As such, the tiger that had killed there was in all likelihood not the man-eater. It was therefore decided that I should sit at the nullah crossing that night. With this settled, the next thing to do was to put in a few hours of sleep. Huey called me at 1 o'clock for a hearty lunch and gave me a parcel of sandwiches for the night, a most acceptable gift. By 2:30 I was on the macan, looking down upon the half-eaten young bull as my 4 assistants removed the branches with which they had covered the carcass that morning to protect it from vultures. There was silence after their departure and, as was to be expected, no travelers passed along the road, the presence of the man-eater discouraging people, especially towards evening, from using a track on which he had already killed a man. I was surprised, therefore, to hear voices approaching from the Talamali village direction some time after 5 o'clock, and astonished when I recognized the party as my own 4 attendants, accompanied by Sweza carrying a gun. They came to tell me that the man-eater had killed a woman while she was carrying water from a well near the hamlet of Dimbam, which was 17 miles away on the Satyamangalam-Chamrajnagar road. Huey had sent them with the news, as he felt that I might not consider it worthwhile to sit up all night to shoot a tiger which obviously could not be the man-eater. No tiger that had devoured half a bull the previous night would walk a distance of 17 miles to kill a woman the next morning. I heartily agreed with the message Huey had sent and came down from the macan. As far as I was concerned, the tiger that haunted the nullah was welcome to the remaining half of his meal. When I got back, Huey suggested that I go at once to Dimbam and try to find a place to sit up, either near the well or wherever the woman had been killed. No doubt her family would have removed her remains for cremation, but it was just possible that the man-eater might return to the spot during the night in search of the body of his victim. I agreed and started straight away, taking my 4 helpers along in case of need. It was almost dark when we left Talamali village and I switched on the headlights of the Studebaker. Just a mile farther on, the road descended steeply to cross the first of several intersecting streams, all dry at this time of the year, and strung out across the road on the opposite bank of this stream, reflecting the beams from my lights, were the eyes of a herd of bison. The herd galloped away, disturbed by the noise when I changed gear to cross the stream, that is, all of them except the herd bull, which stood squarely in the center of the road, his head partly lowered and pawing the ground in an attitude obviously nasty and threatening. Bisons are generally quite harmless animals and run away at the slightest sight or sound of human beings. Here was one of them behaving rather differently. Perhaps he felt I constituted a danger to the herd. More likely he was puzzled by the headlights of the car and never realized that human beings were behind them. In any case, I did not wish to risk the consequences of a charge. It meant shooting the bull, which I had no desire to do, and quickly, for the signs of an impending charge within the next few seconds were unmistakable. If he succeeded, I knew my Studebaker would be a write-off together with some, if not all of us, who were inside. With my own eyes I have seen a loaded trunk overturned by a charging bison on the Tipikadu road in the Nilgiri jungles. The driver had been killed by the truck itself while the bison had disposed of his assistant and the cleaner by goring and trampling them to pulp. These unpleasant thoughts passed quickly through my mind. There was just one chance left before using my rifle, and I would have to take it at once. That chance lay in the old klaxon horn fixed to the right of me on the windshield of the Studebaker. Many an elephant had I scared with this same ancient klaxon. Its blatant, brassy blare had made them flee in abject terror. So I tried it again. I pumped the spring lever of that old horn hard and repeatedly. A ghastly sound rent the jungle silence. The bull raised its lowered head, its eyes dilated by fear of what seemed like all hell let loose, and the next moment it plunged into the bamboo undergrowth and vanished from sight. After that I saw quite a lot of game, which was rather unusual for so early an hour, and incidentally a good omen, so far as hunting superstition goes. Spotted deer and 2 sambar crossed individually. A sloth bear was digging by the roadside as my lights disturbed him, and a panther leaped from left to right a furlong after I had passed the Honatheti Forest Lodge and was negotiating a valley between 2 hillocks, just 7 miles from Dimbum. We arrived at our destination shortly before 8 p.m., which, all said and done, was excellent going, for the track was not only steep and winding but had been in places completely obliterated by the long grass. Hidden boulders lay in that grass, enough to tear open the bottom of any crankcase or differential that bumped against it. In such spots I had had to slow down to a snail's pace, slowly following 2 of the men as they walked side by side a few yards ahead to warn me of hidden rocks before one of the front wheels of the car banged against them. Then we would all help to roll them aside, or if they were too big to move I would circumvent them by going off the track. Dimbum is a hamlet on the main road from Mysore city, past the town of Chamrajnagar, down to another large town in the plains named Satyamangalam, which was the headquarters of the police and forest departments for the area. 50 miles on lies the city of Coimbatore. All that Dimbum could boast were a few huts and a tea shop owned by a Mopla, a descendant of some Arab trader, who centuries earlier had come to the west coast of India for trade but remained to settle down and marry several Hindu Malayali women. These men have kept their business acumen through the years and there is hardly any trade in which numbers of them do not excel. The tea shop at Dimbum was kept open by the Mopla and his 3 wives throughout the 24 hours of the day. Tired lorry drivers ascending the steep Ghat road from Satyamangalam, 16 miles away, could count on a large mug of steaming tea or coffee at any time of the day or night, together with a hot meal of curry and rice. There was another essential commodity thrown in with the refreshment, and it was free: cool water for their boiling radiators when their trucks arrived in a cloud of steam after that long ascent. There is a rest house for travelers, too, and it is beautifully situated upon the edge of the escarpment that overlooks the valley many thousands of feet below. The nearer part of this valley at the base of the escarpment is heavily forested, but the road can be seen winding through the jungle and finally breaking out into the cultivated lands that stretch away to the horizon. In the middle distance is Satyamangalam, while far away on the skyline to the southwest is Coimbatore. Those jungles at the foot of the hill recall the escapades of the tiger I named the Mauler of Rajnagara, for it was there that I spent some exciting days looking for him without success. To look upon the plains from this rest house at nightfall is like looking down into fairyland. The myriad points of electric light, frequently interspersed with colored lights of every hue, stand out in sharp contrast to the black void. Away to the southwest is an angry glow upon the horizon, the reflection of the lights of Coimbatore, too far away to be seen directly, upon the cloud-layered sky. I drove to the Mopla's tea shop, for that I knew would be the fountainhead of all the information I wanted. Abdul Ghani, the ambitious proprietor, knew me well. In fact, I had dropped in for a cup of tea at his place on my way to Huey's farm and had told him the reason for my visit. He greeted me loudly now and in his high-pitched, excited voice, began pouring out his news. "Why do you go to Talavadi looking for your tiger, Sahib, when it's right here? This morning it killed a woman at the well, just behind this tea shop. A damned nuisance, indeed. We need a great deal of water here, for making tea and for the radiators of the 100 or more lorries that need it every day. This requires many visits to the well and many buckets of water. My 3 wives have all refused to go there since they heard the news. Disobedient, good-for-nothing bitches, all 3 of them. I have threatened to kick 'em out. Even beaten them. But with one accord they told me to go myself. Cannot somebody rid me of these wenches? Now I put it to you, Sahib. Can I possibly leave the tea shop? So I have been compelled to engage a servant on daily wages from today. This costs money and in any case she is a lazy slut. Look Sahib, as a good Mussulman it is not the custom for me to allow strangers to speak to my womenfolk. But you are a friend, sir. Please talk to my wives and advise them to fetch the water." A difficult assignment indeed. Besides, I had better things to do than persuade old Abdul Ghani's wives to commit suicide. For that was the fate they would invite by visiting the well with the man-eater about. I could not blame the women for going on strike. Old Abdul Ghani thought more of his money than of his wives, but I did not tell him so. It would hurt his feelings. I said instead, "I have come to shoot the tiger, Abdul Ghani, so if you'll help me, your problem will be solved. Let's not waste time, but tell me exactly how the woman was killed." "What is there to say, Sahib? She went for water. She was returning with it. Then the shaitan Bagh leapt from the bushes and carried her off into the jungle. She screamed loudly but the tiger only growled. Another woman was going down for water, too, and was but a few yards away when it happened. She heard and saw everything. She ran back to this very place and told us. I had 5 or 6 customers here at the time. We bolted and barred the doors and locked ourselves in for nearly 2 hours. That was another loss of business. It was only when other drivers arrived and banged on the front door that we opened up. Then a large party of us went down to the well. Of the woman there is no sign. Her broken pot remains where it fell from her hands. There is nothing more to tell you. Have there been earlier reports of a tiger in this locality, Abdul Ghani? Has anyone else seen it? Did anybody notice anything distinctive about the animal?" I fired the questions rapidly. But the old man only laughed. "What can be distinctive about a tiger?" he inquired. "They all look alike, with a head, 4 legs and a tail. Besides, why do you ask such silly questions of me? Have I not told you already that nobody except the other woman who was going herself to the well for water saw the tiger? She said it was a huge beast and looked like Shaitan, the devil, himself." One last question I asked, with visions of possibly being able to sit up over the victim's remains of the next day. "Has the woman's body been found?" Abdul Ghani's derisive grin widened. "Who is there to search for it, Sahib? Do you think we are mad? We are alive now. The woman is dead. If we go in search of her body and the tiger finds us, we too will be dead. And that will not help her." How often had I not heard those same words before, spoken in so many different languages, when inquiring if a man-eater's victim or the remains had been found. It was evident that the Mopla could give me no further help. I would have to do things for myself and think out some plan. So I ordered 2 mugs of tea for myself, and a mug each for the men I had brought in the car from Talavadi, and selecting the cornermost table in the grimy tea shop took out my pipe to smoke while considering the best course of action. The first thing to do was to get rid of Abdul Ghani, who had started talking again. Very frankly I asked him to leave me alone as I wanted to think out a plan. The old man's behavior was particularly irritating that day. With a wicked smirk, he remarked, "If you want the tiger, why not call it?" Then he went to serve the tea. 4 tracks join at Dimbum, almost directly in front of the tea shop. Or rather, 2 of them are tracks, while the other 2 consist of the main road that passes through the hamlet, leading northwards towards Mysore and southwards to Satyamangalam. I have intentionally counted this one main road as 2 because, so far as searching for the tiger went, he might cross it to the north of Dimbum, or go down the Ghat road as it fell away to the south towards Satyamangalam. The 3rd track was the one I had just travelled, leading from Talavadi and Talaimalai, and the 4th track led into the jungle and was hardly noticeable. It began just behind the rest house and then wound eastwards through the forest for 10 miles or more, keeping more or less to the edge of the continuation of the Dimbum escarpment that overlooked the plains as far as the watershed of the Cauvery River, 50 miles to the east. Being the least used of the 4, this last track was the one along which most animals were to be seen, especially bison and sambar. Quite a number of bear came up the escarpment, and tigers very often crossed it by steep hidden routes on their long trek of more than 50 miles eastwards, through very dense jungle and mountain terrain, to the Cauvery River. After about 10 miles this track dwindled to a mere footpath that threaded through very heavy bamboo jungles, inhabited more by elephants, bison and sambar than by tigers. For the area is infested by tick, and tigers definitely do not like ticks. It was pitch dark outside, an ideal night for using a spotlight in searching for animals. I could motor up the road towards Mysore for about 5 miles and then return, shining my spotlight and hoping the man-eater might cross by sheer chance. I could then repeat the performance along the Ghat road in the opposite direction. I could even motor along the road I had come from Talaimalai. But motoring along the 4th track to the east would not be advisable. Here I would have to walk, for this track was not only in a very bad state, littered with big stones and full of potholes, but it twisted and turned, and was full of sharp gradients. It entailed far too much gear work and consequent noise, which would drive away the man-eater and any other animal that happened to be near, before I had a chance of seeing them. Where to begin was anybody's choice, and I decided to walk along the eastern track first, while I was still fresh and because it would take the longest time. Finishing my tea, I paid Abdulkani and told my 4 men to catch up with as much sleep as they could while I took a walk up the eastern trail. Not being old acquaintances of mine, they thought I was mad. Abdulkani, who had overheard the conversation and who had known me for quite a long time, remarked, "You think he's mad, eh? That's no discovery. I've known him to be mad for a long time." For some reason the old rascal was annoying me more and more that evening. I checked the torch in the .405 and the spare 5-cell torch that I intended using for the actual reconnaissance, as it would be far too tiresome to keep pointing the barrel of the rifle about so as to use its torch. Then I walked to the rest house, stood on the veranda plinth for a few minutes to admire once more the twinkling lights of Satyamangalam, and finally started along the eastern track that began behind the bungalow. With the first turn, that came within a few yards, I was shut off from the friendly light of the Petromax lantern hanging in front of the tea shop and from the sounds that came from within. The man-eater had disappeared with his victim, and there was no knowing where he had taken her. Tigers have been known to carry their kills for a distance of half a mile and even more, although generally they don't go so far. He had killed the woman that morning and no doubt had eaten part of her. The rest he would have to come back for after dark to make a second meal. It was now a little after 9:30 p.m., and as the habits of tigers generally go, the man-eater should have returned by now for his second meal and be enjoying it at this moment, or very likely he would have finished it by now. After all, there is not much meat in an already half-eaten human carcass. If he had eaten his fill, he would next seek water, and I knew there were 3 possible places for him to do that. The closest was at a water hole that was skirted by the very track I was following and lay hardly a furlong ahead. The second was by a regular stream that crossed the road to Mysore about 2 miles away. The third was another stream that I had already passed in the car that evening and was about 3 miles from Dimbum on the Talaimalai road. Apart from the water hole I was approaching, the man-eater could drink at any point throughout the course of the 2 streams, and the chance of meeting him over water was extremely slim. I was approaching the water hole with these thoughts still in my mind, and the first signs of its nearness were a row of blue-green lights in pairs, that kept jerking up and down as they stared into the bright beam of my torch. Spotted deer. Here was a herd, either on its way to the water hole or returning from it. I stopped abruptly and put out the light to allow the deer a chance of going away quietly. If any of them caught the human scent behind my light, it would surely voice an alarm cry to warn its companions. That cry would also alert the tiger if it was in the vicinity, and I did not want that to happen. The night was pitch dark and not a sound came to me from the spotted deer. The silence was intense. Not even a cricket chirped. I did not like it at all. It was eerie. I switched on the torch. The bobbing pinpoints of light had gone. The deer had vanished in complete silence. That was good, for they had raised no alarm. I waited a few minutes longer to allow them to get far enough away, so as not to send me or see my torch beam. Then I started moving forward silently along the track. The next turn would bring me to the water hole that lay to the left. That was when I heard the splashing and gurgling and loud swishing noises. An elephant was at the water hole and enjoying a bath. I stopped again. His presence was a nuisance, for elephants, like most human beings, like their bath. Once they start, they not only gurgle and drink and bathe and gamble, but they lie in the water and play in it, even if all alone, sometimes for an hour at a stretch. I could not waste so much time waiting for the creature to go away of its own accord. On the other hand, if I advanced and it saw or scented me, the chances were that it might trumpet in alarm and that, again, would warn the man-eater, should he be within earshot, that something strange was moving through the forest, something unusual enough to disturb an elephant. For me to make a noise to frighten away the elephant would be folly for the same reason. Then I had an idea. I pointed the beam of the torch high up to the treetops in the direction of the water hole in the hope that it might be seen by the elephant and cause him to move off. Evidently I was too far away at first, because he did not see the light. Then I advanced till I was almost at the bend of the track before trying again. This time I succeeded. All sounds of that most enjoyable bath ceased abruptly. There came a great squelching as the elephant lifted his big body out of the mud, followed by a rhythmic plop 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 of heavy footsteps as he plodded slowly through the water to the bank. Then followed repeated hissing sounds as of escaping steam. Although disturbed by my light, the elephant did not intend to deny himself the last luxury of a sand bath, and that was what he was doing at that moment. He was throwing sand over himself. I allowed him time, while continuing to flash the torch from treetop to keep him sufficiently disturbed. The hissing stopped eventually. It was followed in a little while by faint crackling sounds as the beast moved its heavy way through the undergrowth bordering the water hole. Once again came silence. The elephant had moved off, and just then the sharp crack of a breaking branch told me that he had stopped for feed, but far enough away not to be alarmed at my passing. I negotiated the turn in the track and came upon the water hole lying limpid and dark before me, a few wisps of vapor already rising from its warmer surface into the rapidly cooling night air. Hundreds of pinpoints of brilliant red light, like tiny rubies scattered over the water, shone in my torchlight, and from the nearer bank bordering the pool came the chorus of frogs. Alarmed by my approach, they had leaped off the bank in great numbers. With vigorous thrusts of their hind legs they propelled themselves into the center of the pool, where they whirled around to face me, their tiny eyes glistening and reflecting like 1,000 rubies. I had been to such pains to avoid the elephant raising an alarm at my approach, only to meet with a singular defeat at the hands of those most insignificant of creatures, the frogs. The tiger heard them, for he happened to be there, and must have seen me and my light simultaneously. Fortunately for me, he was on the further bank of the pool, where he must have come to drink, and not on the track, or matters may have turned out differently. Under similar circumstances, any normal tiger would have taken himself off quietly and I would never have known of his presence. But this one growled, and continued to growl, the ominous sound rumbling from the darkness at the other end, across the pool and to me as I came to an abrupt and uncertain halt. The tiny ruby-red eyes of the frogs floating on the surface disappeared altogether, as if some switch had cut off the power, when they dived beneath the surface to escape that awful sound. On the opposite bank of the pool whence the growling arose there was a great disturbance as the myriad frogs that had been resting on the cool sand by the water's edge threw themselves into the pool for safety and with the tiny legs struck out frantically for the center. The growling stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The frogs fell into a hushed silence too. I then directed the beam of my torch around the bushes and undergrowth that grew down to the water's edge at the opposite end. Would I see the tiger's eyes glow in the beam? I saw nothing and heard nothing. My light fell only upon the jungle and a deathly silence covered everything. The tiger had vanished. Had he made off? A normal tiger would do just that, but no normal tiger would have growled at seeing my torchlight. This beast was far from normal. He was angry, and he was unafraid of the approach of man. Was this the man-eater? I glanced around nervously. My front was safe. To attack from that direction the tiger would have to charge through water and I knew he was very unlikely to do that. Rather, he would come around the pool and attack me from either flank, or from behind. If he chose a flank attack, he would have to charge along the bank or the track, either from the direction I had just come or from the opposite end where the pathway left the pool. More probably he would attack from the rear, where the jungle bordered the edge of the track and not 2 yards from where I was standing. Then I would have no chance whatever. There was but one thing to do and I did it very quickly. I scrambled down the sloping bank into the water and, feeling the way before me with each footstep, made for the middle of the pool as fast as I could. I knew it was not very deep and there I would be safe from attack from any direction. No tiger, not even a man-eater, at least not in my experience, would attack across water, and even if it did, the tables would be turned entirely in my favor. I would have the tiger in the open and completely at my mercy, long before he could reach me. The water had reached a little above my knees when the tiger growled again. This time it was a loud growl, almost a roar. And it came from the jungle bordering the track, from the very direction in which I had expected the attack. Had I not sought the safety of the pool just in time, the tiger would have launched itself upon me. He was growling with fury now at finding me beyond reach. But was I really beyond reach? The next few moments would answer that question. Of one fact I had no doubt whatever. I was dealing with the man-eater and no ordinary tiger. The hate in its behavior clearly showed that. Huey's bullet had turned this animal into a fiend. I waited in vain. The tiger did not emerge. The growling stopped as unexpectedly as it had started, and once again I was plunged into silence with a sea of darkness around me. I played the beams of my torch in every direction as I turned slowly around, hoping to catch a glimpse of the beast's eyes as they reflected the light, or of the striped body slinking from bush to bush. But I saw and heard nothing. The myriads of frogs that had experienced such a disturbing night, first with the arrival of the elephant, then myself, and finally the tiger, all went below the surface of the water when I waded into it. But they could not remain submerged for long and had to come up for breath. One by one they came to the surface now, soundlessly, to gulp in air, and soon the nearer edge of the wide circle of light thrown by my torch once more revealed hundreds of pairs of tiny red eyes gazing on me in fear. A long time seemed to have passed since I left the tea shop, but a quick glance at my watch showed it was only 10:30 p.m. How long would I have to wait for the tiger to move, if he moved at all? I began to get tired of standing in the water. It grew colder and wreaths of vapor arose from the surface of the pool, obscuring the jungle around its edges and making it difficult for the light of my torch to penetrate. At the same time, I realized that if I got back to the pathway I would be at the mercy of the man-eater should he decide to ambush me at any spot along the track. I felt certain he had not gone away but was biding his time till I came out of the water. Midnight, and it was biting cold. By now I realized I must not shine my torch continuously, for the 5 cells would run down and under no circumstances could I risk using up the cells of the other torch, clamped to my rifle, for the accuracy of my shooting depended on them. So I extinguished the light and was plunged abruptly into darkness. That was when I noticed that the night was cloudy, with no stars to be seen. However, There was no danger so long as I remained in the water. My hearing would warn me of the approach of any animal. Very soon, that was what happened. An elephant came, perhaps the same one I had disturbed earlier. Probably another. I was standing still and he did not hear or see me. The wind was blowing from him to me, so he could not scent me. I felt I was safe, for in any case his sight was too poor to penetrate the mist that had settled over the whole pool like a thick bank of fog, and he would not be able to see me. I heard the loud, as he exhaled air through his trunk, and then the sucking noises as he drew in water and splashed it into his mouth and over his body. He drank and he drank, a seemingly endless number of gallons of water. At last he decided to have a regular bath, and I heard the tremendous plop 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 of his great feet approaching me as he waded through the water towards the center of the pool. This would never do, I thought. So I shone the torch straight into his face. That night was for me one in which I seemed fated to meet animals of strange behavior. According to all the rules of the game, the elephant should have turned tail and bolted from my bright light, but he did nothing of the kind. He trumpeted shrilly, coiled up his trunk, and charged me. Taken aback, instead of putting the 5-cell quickly into its pouch at the left side of my belt, so as to leave both my hands free to handle my rifle, I missed the pouch and dropped the torch into the water. Out it went. There was no time to retrieve it. The charging elephant was dangerously close. I brought the .405 to my shoulder while pressing the button of the smaller torch that was clamped to its barrel with my left thumb. The beam cut through the darkness as I aimed a foot above the head of the elephant and fired in an attempt to halt that charge. No rogue elephant had been proclaimed by the forestry department, and so, as far as possible, I should try to avoid killing this animal. I had erred by letting him come too close to me, and I should not have shone the torch directly in his face. As these thoughts rushed through my mind, I awaited the result of that deterring shot. If he still came on, I would be forced to stop him with my next bullet, or he would kill me. There was no doubt of that. Luckily it worked. The great beast braked to a halt by planting all 4 feet firmly in the mud. The impetus of the rush brought him on, skidding ludicrously in the clay till he ended up sitting on his hindquarters like an elephant at the circus. Encouraged by his failing nerve, I fired a second time, again over his head. The elephant turned and bolted. When the noise and tumult had died away, I felt disgusted, but at the same time relieved. My 2 shots must have driven away the man-eater. My chance of success was gone. But now I was safe also and could at last get out of the water. Shivering with the cold, I started my walk back to Dimbam. I knew I had only a short distance to cover, but there was always the danger that the man-eater, driven from the immediate vicinity of the pool by the sound of my shots, might still be lurking somewhere along the pathway and might ambush me. At last the lights of Satyamangalam, twinkling in the black void of the plains below me, put an end to my tension. I got into the rest house, took off my wet pants and, as I had brought no change of clothes, went to sleep without them. A banging on the door awakened me. I had closed all the windows and it was dark inside, but a glance at my watch surprised me. It was 9:30 a.m. I put on my pants again. They were still wet. The banging on the door was renewed, this time more urgently, and I could hear the murmur of voices on the veranda. I opened the front door. Confronting me was Abdul Kani himself, his 3 wives and 4 or 5 other people, all in a great state of excitement. Obviously the tea shop had been closed down. Something very serious must have happened. "Come quickly, Sahib," called the excited Mopla. "The tiger has just carried away the girl we employed to fetch the water." Grabbing my rifle and some cartridges, I hastened with the group to the tea shop, while he quickly told the story. Barely 30 minutes earlier the girl had taken a basket of cooking utensils to wash at the well behind the tea shop. She had decided it would be easier that way than carrying a pitcher or more of water to the building for the purpose. One of the wives had been watching her from the back door to ensure she did not linger unduly over the task. The girl, a maiden of about 18 years, was bending down, absorbed in her work, when a movement behind her had caught the eye of the watching woman. She had glanced in that direction and was horrified to see a tiger, belly to the ground, sneaking stealthily upon the unsuspecting servant girl from behind. The woman had screeched a warning. The girl heard and jumped to her feet. But the tiger drove home his charge. He had leapt upon his victim and, not waiting to kill her, had taken the unfortunate girl in his mouth and leaped back into the cover of the undergrowth. Terrible screams could be heard long after the tiger and victim had disappeared from sight. Alarmed by his wife's yells and hearing distant wailing, Abdulkani and the other members of the household had rushed to the rear door to find out the cause of the disturbance. Then they had come in a body to the rest house. The man-eater had taken another victim at 9 in the morning, and exactly where he had killed only a few hours earlier. This was something unheard of in the annals of man-eaters. Telling everyone to remain indoors, I hastened to the well. The scattered utensils, some washed and the others not, showed that the girl had been taken by surprise while engrossed in her task, and a single sliding pug mark indicated where the tiger had stopped his rush to seize his victim and had slipped on the wet earth where the girl had been doing her washing. There were no other marks on the surrounding earth, trampled flat as it was by the feet of the many people who came there all day long to draw water, and baked by the sun's rays. The ground was far too hard to carry pug marks, while the girl had been grabbed so quickly that there was no blood trail of any kind. The woman who had witnessed the killing, Abdulkani's second wife, called to me from the doorway, pointing out the direction in which the man-eater had gone with his victim, and I followed it. The clearing in which the well stood ended abruptly in a wall of lantana bushes that fringed the jungle. No tiger, carrying his prey, would dream of forcing himself through this tangled obstruction. It would be impossible for any beast. There must be some other way, and I started to look for it. I found it eventually, a game path, close to the ground, tunneling at a height of not more than 4 feet through the lower branches of the lantana. It had been made by wild pigs during the rainy season, when they visited the clearing to root and dig in the swamp which would at that season surround the well. In places the tiger had had to crawl along this tunnel, dragging its victim, and I followed suit, crouching low and at times on hands and knees. Within a few yards I came upon the first evidence of the tragedy. Some torn shreds of a sari and a quantity of blood on the lantana leaves that littered the game trail. Probably the victim had been struggling to free herself, and this was where the tiger had killed her. After that there was a regular blood trail, and more shreds of the sari caught on the lantana. There came a bend in the tunnel, and here the remains of the girl's clothing had caught on a thorny bush. The man-eater must have become angry and wrenched his victim free, for the scraps of a sari and a skirt had been torn from her body and were hanging on the thorns. With the removal of all her clothing, the blood had fallen directly on the ground and leaves, making a ghastly red trail through the tunnel. I could not know how far the tiger had carried his victim. Probably the screeching and screaming from the tea shop had made him decide to go to a quieter place before commencing his meal. At least, I hoped so. For if he was anywhere near and attacked me from my rear, I was completely at his mercy in this death trap of a tunnel. This thought caused me to stop frequently to listen. He might give himself away by growling. Tigers often do that when followed. Partly in anger, partly as a warning, but more often to strengthen their own courage. For all their lives have been spent in pursuing a fleeing prey, and it is an unusual and terrifying experience for any tiger to realize he is the object of pursuit himself. Not a sound did I hear. Complete silence filled the twisting tunnel. At last the lantana began to give way to jungle proper. The tunnel came to an end and I was able to stand upright. There was a grassy glade through which the blood trail led before it merged into a park-like jungle of babule and boxflower shrubs with grass between. I judged that I had not far to go now before meeting the tiger, who must have started his meal. That is, provided the man-eater had not heard me and realized he was being followed. If that had happened, he might take himself off altogether or lie in wait for me at some spot close to his kill. He might even creep forward to intercept me, or ambush me from either side or from the rear. Then I heard a crow cawing some distance away. I listened carefully, and there was no mistaking that persistent cawing. The crow was watching the tiger with his victim and was excitedly calling reinforcements to be ready to enjoy the feast that was soon to follow. Sounds and the distances from which they emanate are difficult to locate and estimate correctly in the forest. Air currents, the density of tree growth and the terrain all make difficulties. In flat country conditions are not quite so bad, but in hilly areas like this, sounds and distances are often unjudgeable. I reckoned the crow was about 60 to 70 yards away, and slowly, very stealthily, studying the ground before me so as not to tread upon a dried twig or stone and so betray myself, I advanced step by step. I do not know how far I had gone when I heard the first sounds of the feast. The sharp crack of a bone being broken, followed by crunching and tearing. The crow was still cawing excitedly. I reckoned that I was within 30 yards now, possibly a good deal less. I stopped and began to think. The crow offered a greater risk at that moment than the tiger, for he was sitting on a tree and had the advantage of height. I knew that if he saw me he would cease cawing at once. He might even fly away. The man-eater, engrossed in his meal, knew that the crow was watching him but had ignored the bird and his cawing as a matter of no consequence. A sudden end to that cawing and the sudden departure of the crow would tell the tiger at once that something had alarmed the bird, that some danger to himself was approaching. For crows fear no other bird and ignore the presence of wild animals. They fear only the human race. But I had not yet alarmed the crow. At a snail's pace, with infinite caution, I advanced, crouching low, shuffling forward and halting again, watching the ground in front of me before making any movement, glancing to right and left and even looking behind when the tearing and crunching sounds ceased for a moment. For so long as I could hear those sounds I knew the tiger was in front. When they ceased I could no longer know where he was. There lay the greatest danger, for he might creep upon me from behind. Man-eaters generally snatch their victims that way. Suddenly an uncanny silence fell over everything. At first I could not account for it. Then I knew the cause. The crow had stopped cawing. Undoubtedly something was afoot. Then I saw the crow, but too late. He had seen me first. With what seemed a tremendous fluttering, he flew to another tree. And I was right. The man-eater had become suspicious. He had started to move. Was he moving away from me or towards me? Was he trying to escape or attack? As these questions raced through my mind, with the corner of my eye I saw the crow rise again. This time he flew out of sight. I froze in my tracks. But it was too late. The cunning crow flew back to investigate and perched at almost the same spot as the one where I saw him first. He turned his head sideways for a better view of me, cawed and bobbed. Convinced that I was dangerous, he fluttered his wings and then flew to yet another tree to turn around and watch me. I stopped watching the crow and stared at the bushes all around. And I turned about to watch the bushes behind me. There was a pricking sensation at the back of my neck. Every cell of my body warned me that I was in great danger. I knew that the man-eater was about to pounce. But I simply could not see him, stare as I might at the undergrowth all around. The jungle was ominously silent. Not a twig cracked, not a leaf stirred. The birds and insects were silent, so too were the bushes and the long grass that grew between the trees. I looked in vain for the stirring of a branch or a blade of grass, the bending of a sapling stem that might betray movement below and the passage of a creeping body. But there was not a movement anywhere, not a sound. I knew that the tiger was employing all his skill to make his last rush a complete surprise. And then there came to my mind the scene I had witnessed many years before by moonlight, beside a jungle pool in the heart of a deep forest far away. A sambar hind was approaching the water hole cautiously. All was silent. Suddenly, for no reason whatever, she wheeled noisily and rushed away. The ruse worked then, for the tiger patiently lying in wait to ambush her a few yards further on, now lost his head. He thought his prey was about to escape and he bounded after her. But the hind had too much of a start and got away too safely. Now I did the same thing. But I did not turn and run back, for something warned me that the man-eater was already there. I stamped noisily and ran forward diagonally, but only for 4 paces. Then I stopped. As on that moonlit night so many years before, the simple ruse worked again. The man-eater roared and bounded after me from behind. He took 2 leaps and then halted in crouching amazement as this strange man before him, instead of continuing to run, turned around and fired rapidly. The tiger knew no more after that, but I know that if I had not heeded the warning of his very close presence behind me, or if I had run backwards instead of forwards, I would not be here to tell this tale. The end.